and a very warm welcome to Money Control. I am Shweta Punj. Well, when was the last time you asked ChatGPT to write an essay for you? I do know that I struggle with my son on that. And where do you think ChatGPT is getting the analysis that it's presenting, rehashing for you? Well, it's coming from somebody who had done original research and written that content out that ChatGPT has taken and presented. Have you ever wondered why is it that some articles show up more often than the others when you run a Google search? And those articles might frame your thinking or your point of view on a certain subject or a topic. The rise of big tech companies like Google and Meta has transformed our lives in more ways than one. But it has also exposed worrying trends of monopolistic control and unfair practices. Well, there are big concerns impacting publishers globally, and India is no different. Recently, Union Minister Ashwini Vaishnav said that big tech needs to compensate traditional media for content. To understand this in greater detail, the fight for attention to ensure that regulation does not stifle innovation and that big tech is held accountable. I have with me Mr. Rajeev Chandrashekhar, former Minister of State at the Ministry of Information Technology. Mr. Chandrashekhar spoke about this several years ago, and the Indian government is now reiterating this on several platforms. Many thanks, Mr. Chandrashekhar, for joining us. When Mr. Vaishnav made this statement, it reminded me of something that you had said about 2 to 3 years ago. And you have said this in the past as well, that big tech needs to compensate traditional media. How far are we in that journey? Because it's happening in other countries. In California, for instance, Google is fighting back. Australia has imposed certain restrictions on big tech. EU has come out with very definitive rules on this. But where are we in this journey in India, Mr. Chandrashekhar?
So thank you, Shweta, for, I think, having this conversation. Yes, you are right. I think this was something that I had broached a couple of years ago, and I'm glad that the government is taking that forward. Look, the broader issue, and I know that Mr. Vaishnav has spoken to the issue of content value sharing or content monetization sharing. But the bigger, broader principal issue is the issue of what is the nature of the relationship between these big platforms that have come to dominate the internet and the hundreds and thousands of people who are creating original content, putting out their work in the public domain. And these platforms are essentially today scraping the internet and having access to all of this content, either through their search engines or through the AI platforms or through the social media platforms that deliver news and other content. So what is the nature of that relationship? And that is an issue that has been left undiscussed, unaddressed for several years and decades. Because everybody saw the internet as a good place to dump their information and share it. But now when the issue and the main point about monetization is now front and center, who actually benefits from the value of that content? Whether it's a content created by Money Control or any other media company, or content created by me as a scientist sitting in my lab that I put out a paper in the public domain. Who has the right to that content and who has therefore the right to the value of that content is an issue that needs to be discussed, because with AI, this problem becomes even more bigger and compounded, because AI and all of these AI platforms, whether it's ChatGPT or OpenAI or XAI or any of these AI platforms, live off using, scraping the internet, using publicly available content to train their models. And then they become multi-billion-dollar models, but the person whose content it is seldom sees the value in that whole value chain when that content is monetized or is used to train a model. So it is a slightly larger issue that needs to be discussed. But on one particular aspect, which has obviously got the attention of the Indian media, is the issue of when media houses create original content, and that is put on the net there to be publicly consumed, can platforms like social media or AI platforms use that content without sharing it equitably, sharing the monetization of it equitably with the creator of the content? This is an important question in the context of the larger important question.
So, Mr. Chandrasekhar, you've been part of the government, and when you brought it up 2 years ago, was this something that was discussed? Is this something that the Indian government has discussed with big tech in the past? The kind of pushback the kind of pushback that this is facing, say in California and in other countries, do you expect a very sharp pushback from big tech where India is concerned as well?
Look, Shweta, one of the reasons why this has not really moved forward in India and in several years, even though the problem, as I stated, is very obvious, is logical, is that media per se, and this is not unique to India, media per se, both loath to have the government intervene in what they thought was a contractual relationship between them and the social media platforms. And so they said, look, if we have a good relationship with YouTube and Google, why should we get the government in? And for many years, the media saw this, and this is very important to understand. Media, these social media platforms, as a way for them to expand their reach, to take their content and distribute it further at minimal cost. Now, fast forward to now, and media has woken up to the brutal reality that effectively, most of the business models are now impacted by or controlled by very much the presence of these platforms and the contractual agreements that they have with these platforms. And the asymmetry of power. These platforms today control about 60 to 70% of all advertising rupees. And so the asymmetry of power has now woken the media up, unfortunately, at a time when media's own credibility is at a rock bottom. So there is now the media is saying, no, help us. And it may be a case that there are not that many people who want to help the media, because this is a problem that has been created in large part because of media's own apathy or media's own dependence on these social media platforms over the last decade. But in our government, I know from 22, when I first broached this asymmetry and then create an equitable relationship between all creators, not just media, including the small creators, including the micro creators, the influencers, and the platforms that monetize their content. I think the government has been very positive. I think what we are seeing now is the media belatedly waking up to it. And Shweta, I had many meetings with the media heads, and I told them that, why are you not asking for it? Why does it sound like only I or the government is asking for it? And they used to shrug their head and say all of that. So, but I'm glad that now the media companies themselves, the legacy media, has woken up to the real challenges that this asymmetry and this distortion of power between the big platforms and themselves are facing, especially when digital media is now going to be the new normal and the legacy media is not as relevant as anymore.
Right. So, Australia has very effectively implemented what is called a bargaining code, and that's supposed to be seen as a success model. Do you think India could adopt something similar? And if you could just take us through how regulation could play out, if it does come in this space. What are the aspects that would be regulated? Why is it that the Indian media was resistant earlier and now they seem to have made a turnaround? What is it that they've realized suddenly?
What they've realized is very clearly that that the platforms are squeezing them, and that the revenue sharing agreements, the monetization or sharing between those who create content and those who distribute the content is asymmetric, and it is working to the benefit of the platform rather to the media company or to the content creator. So I think that is what has woken up people, and the more power these platforms have on advertising and monetization, the more they will misuse that power. That is just a fact of life. So that is what is happening all around the world. Now, What will be the nature of the law and the regulation? Certainly, Shweta, whether this falls under the ambit of competition law, which can argue for a free, fair, open, equitable internet, or does this fall under the broader technology legislation and jurisprudence that needs to evolve? That is something that needs to be debated. I think what we are seeing is the first step, that people are becoming aware that there is this asymmetry, there is this unfairness that exists that could be potentially misused, and that there needs to be some sort of a legal framework that will protect them. Now, whether it's the Australia model or some other model, I don't want to prejudge that. It is subject, to discourse that we all can have. But I certainly believe no platform, because of their power, should be allowed to misuse that power against whether it is media or indeed an individual creator. It could be somebody that is making a small movie that is dumped publicly. Can Netflix tomorrow use that stream and make millions of it? So there are broader intellectual property issues. And look, Shweta, if you were on a television channel and broadcasting something, and you put it on a YouTube channel, that certainly doesn't give the right to anybody to take your content, because there are intellectual property rights that come along with your content. So those are the issues that need to be embedded in some sort of a framework of law, whether that is competition law or whether that is technology law. That is for the government to debate and discuss and finalize.
Right. So we also have the Digital India Act. We have the IT Act. Do these acts cover, some aspects of this debate?
No, the Digital India Act is not an act, as you know. It was just a draft that was prepared, and it hasn't really been debated in draft form, or indeed even approved by the government. But the Digital India Act, when we put it out there, had all these aspects. But it could be very well that the government's view is that this can be dealt with in the competition law. So those are fundamental issues that need to be discussed within government on what will be the architecture of the jurisprudence or the legal architecture of the digital ecosystem as we move forward, as we face these new challenges of AI, as we face these new challenges of privacy, and new challenges that there is going to be growing power of these platforms in terms of monetization of content and data. So that is subject matter for a debate within government and a decision by the government. As when I was in government, which was for the 3 years before June 2024, I had proposed that this be a technology-led, digital-led legislation that effectively legislates for the future of the digital ecosystem as we saw it. But there are different voices on this, and it is something that the government will decide, in due course.
Right. There was a recent US judgment that highlighted a tacit agreement with Android phones to prevent other app stores marking Google as a monopoly and mandating fees for in-app billing. And this, this approach obviously creates a very negative impact. Have we seen such instances in India as well? In your tenure as MOS IT, was there, were such instances brought to your notice as well?
Now, look, Google, there was a landmark judgment by the Competition Commission, which was upheld by the NCLT and the NCLAT, which there was a determination that Google was abusing its market power, and they were penalized, if I recall, 250, 260 crores of rupees. But there was a clear finding that Google had misused its market power and market dominance. So there are, competition law around the world, as far as these big digital platforms, is now evolving. People are waking up to what used to be for decades recognized as just innovation, good companies doing great work. And now people are waking up to the risk of this so-called power, this concentration of power in these platforms, vertical integration of search, operating system, video distribution and advertising tech. So people are beginning to wake up to this, and nobody in India should be alarmed, because the rest of the world is pretty much grappling with the same challenges that India will grapple with. or is grappling with. So, yes, we have seen Competition Commission step up and do the right thing vis-a-vis Google. Will there be more of this? I suspect there will be much more of this, not just in India but rest of the world, because in the age of AI, and there is a case going on in New York, Shweta, between OpenAI and New York Times, which is the core, which is arguing the core, which is adjudicating this core issue that we discussed. Who has the right to monetize publicly available content that a media company like New York Times puts out there on the internet, or Shweta Punj puts out, or Rajeev Chandrashekhar puts out? Does the right exist unfettered, or is there a much more legal guideline or guardrails for those rights?
So as we grapple, with regulation in this space, you are an entrepreneur as well, and you've championed the cause of startups while you were in the government as well. So, how do you ensure that as you regulate this space, you do not stifle innovation? I think that should be one of the, big criteria, and that could be a worrying point also for a lot of entrepreneurs. Or do you think that this could provide Indian entrepreneurs, with some sort of protection so that they can also nurture and build and bring up the next Google, say from Bangalore?
No, this is a very powerful question, Shweta, and I think the biggest challenge for governments, especially governments like in our country, which for 65 years viewed regulation as some sort of way of controlling business and controlling corporates, is to evolve into a light touch regulation where there are principles that are laid that people have to follow, and that it is not heavy-handed, intrusive regulation. And I think we have demonstrated to the world and to our startup ecosystem with the data protection law that we passed under Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji, that our approach to something as difficult as data protection and privacy is a sharp contrast from how the Europeans dealt with it. We very clearly, our Prime Minister said from the get-go that it should not be a binary, it should not be about citizens' rights or innovation. It should be innovation as well as protecting citizens' rights. And the data protection law, and I think that is a harbinger of all legislation that will impact the innovation ecosystem in India, will be encourage, catalyze innovation on one hand, support them, at the same time create these guardrails that prevent the misuse and therefore the violation of the rights of our citizen, which is, as you know, any government, any elected representative, it is our duty to protect. So I think we are moving in a direction which is becoming an example to the rest of the world of how we can balance both.
So do you see that happening in the, in holding big tech accountable and compensation of traditional media as well? Do you think that India could, evolve its own model?
No, I think
because we saw that happening.
No, I think with every legislation, I don't think the way to look at this is to look at big tech as the enemy in the room. It's not an antagonistic relationship that we have with these big companies. They bring a lot to the table in terms of supporting our own innovation ecosystem. So they are certainly legitimate partners to India's aspirations in the future of tech. But at the same time, I think they need to know, they need to be prescribed, they need to be told certain rules and expectations that the government of India has and the innovation ecosystem has and the citizens of the country has in terms of free and fair competition, asymmetry of power, content sharing and monetization, safety and trust online, so the openness of the internet. So these are things that we have to evolve and create a set of guardrails and principles for these big tech platforms also to succeed, but succeed not at the cost of our Indian entrepreneurs and Indian creators and Indian media, but working with them. So that is something that requires, like I said, the current laws don't allow for that. We need to move to a new framework that allows that, permits that, and enables that.
Right. So, we just witnessed the US presidential elections, and the results came as a surprise to everybody, once again, the pollsters were not really expecting it. Till the very last minute, I think there was so much confusion. There was so much going on in the betting market. Now here, there's been a lot of talk about how, Elon Musk and Twitter could have really played a role in changing public sentiment and so on. So, I want to get a sense from you on what has been your key takeaway from this election in terms of the role of big tech and social media.
Look, I mean, this is not going to come as a happy thing for anybody or any of my friends in media, but I think one thing that the US election has shown, and it has been evident even in India for some time, that legacy media, the credibility of legacy media is taking a beating. I think a lot of prima donna editors have conflated their opinions and views and their intuition as a popular opinion and have been proved wrong repeatedly, and have in a lot of ways exposed the credibility of these biases of these legacy media platforms. You saw that in Washington Post, you saw that in the LA Times in the US. And social media, especially these digital platforms, have become essentially, and media has allowed this to happen, they've become essentially the disruptors. They've essentially become the carriers of truth and are effectively threatening what used to be an almost unquestioned position of traditional media as the purveyors of truth and the purveyors of impartiality. So that is certainly something that is spreading around the world, this disdain for traditional media, this move away by consumers from traditional media to digital and social media. Citizen journalism is certainly becoming more and more of a powerful tool to communicate news and facts and misinformation. And so therefore, we are living in very interesting times where I think the overall framework of media and the consumption of media and therefore its relationship to social media and the internet are all undergoing a rapid disruptive change.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Chandrasekhar, for that very candid opinion. And yes, I agree with you. I think it's a moment of reflection and reckoning for all of us, not only in India but across the world, on if we are really letting our biases decide what viewers and consumers need to consume. Thank you so much for joining us and for putting this very important issue into perspective. And a big thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. If you have any thoughts and feedback, do leave your comment in the comment section below. Thanks so much for watching.